talents and abilities.
How we go forward.
This is your moment. This is where it happens. This is where your story changes. This is where you decide to take action. This is where you become the solution. This is where you see lives changed. This is where you are changed. This is where adventurous entrepreneurs go. Love people, go places, change lives. Let's get after it. The question you've got to ask yourself is, what am I meant to solve? What big, hairy, audacious problem are you meant to solve? In your city, in your community, in your country, in your world, what are you meant to solve? And once you answer that question, nothing can stop you.
Welcome, everybody. We're about to get started with the IJ Show.
It's time to stop floating down the river of life, just taking whatever comes your way. It's time to live out the dream that's been placed inside of you all along. Start that thing, make that change, take that action, just go. There's just too much at stake and too many lives waiting for you to stay comfortable.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Impact Junkie Show, where we are loving people, going places, and changing lives, and we help you be the solution to the world's biggest, hairiest, most audacious problems in the world. Welcome to the Impact Junkie Show, and today we have a very, very special guest, and all the way from Guatemala and Antigua, Phillip Wilson, the founder and CEO of Ecofiltro. Hey, Phillip.
Hi, Phillip. Thank you for having me on your show.
It's Phillip Squared today. And you're going to hear Phillip's amazing story and the work he's doing to bring clean water across Guatemala and Central America and even beyond that and around the world. And if you're an impact junkie, you've probably already heard some of Phillip's story because it's part of our core. We share a little bit of his story, and we talk about what a triple black belt entrepreneur is that says, you know what, I'm not just figuring out how to make money. That's great. And we believe in that. But more than that is, how are we solving multiple problems and helping those that we say we love and empowering them? So you're going to hear an awesome story. You're going to hear Phillip's story today. And you're going to hear more about Ecofiltro and a new project that he's going to talk about that's even more exciting. So get some coffee, get some tea. And Phillip, tell us a little bit, before we jump into the chapters of your life or the scenes of your movie, why don't you tell us a little bit about where you are now with Ecofiltro?
Sure. So we're actually in a really good place right now. We're going to deliver, we're on track to distribute over 150,000 Ecofiltros, which are water filters. About 60% of those are going to go into rural homes, 40% in urban homes. We just hired 20 more folks over the last 30 days. So the factory is really busy. We're solving a lot of people's access to clean water challenges, and I'm just very grateful that I'm able to lead this company and to keep it on track to our ultimate goal, which is 1 million families, with clean water in rural Guatemala.
You're getting close. We're going to talk about that number in a little bit, and you're going to hear about how Ecofiltro, we talk about turning on our business brains, our entrepreneur minds, our investor minds to empower those that we say we love. And you're going to hear this amazing story. So before we get ahead of ourselves, let's go back. And Impact Junkies, we love stories. We're all about stories and using those as a tool to help us understand what we're meant to solve in this world. And Phillip, why don't we go back before we get to where we are now? Let's go back in time. And I know you have such a beautiful journey to how you got here. So let's talk about your chapters. Take us through the story.
Yeah, sure. So I was born in Guatemala, but my family was living in Australia at the time. And my dad was working in a big corporation, and then we moved to the U.S. I actually grew up in the U.S., but always was going back and forth to Guatemala. My mother's Guatemalan, and really identified more with Guatemala than England, which is where my father was from. Kind of a traditional, went to college and then worked for 2 years, and then I go to business school. I was very young, went to Wharton. I think I was the youngest in my class or near.
Really?
I was 23, and back then it was more traditional to be 27, 28 years old. But I was doing some finance work in a company and thought I wanted to be a banker, believe it or not. So I got lucky, got into Wharton, and then I take my first finance class, and I realized I don't want to be a banker and I don't want to study finance. I couldn't even understand derivatives and all the things that they were teaching there. And so I actually was going to drop out of Wharton. I haven't said this publicly, but I just didn't feel like I realized I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And my mother said, look, you're going to finish what you start. So I took the entrepreneurial track at Wharton. And it was a really great actually major at Wharton, because all the most of the professors that were in the entrepreneurial management major were entrepreneurs. And so I think my claim to fame at Wharton, I think I was the only student that didn't ever go to a job interview, while I was there. And
in the recruiting world, that's unique.
And so I graduated and started my first company in California, and got really lucky. I had a great mentor that basically put up the money for a distribution company we had in the Southwest of the U.S. and we're fortunate, did well, and sold that company to three of the managers, and then got introduced, funny enough, to a banker, and we started a community bank with about 10 other founders, and did well. So I was kind of doing the traditional entrepreneurial route, but also started having a family with my wife in California, and my wife is Guatemalan. And after a few years in California, she wanted to be near her parents in Guatemala. So that brought me back to Guatemala, and started a couple companies here. But I hit I'm 39 years old and, relatively successful, didn't really have to work a lot. I was kind of living a very pathetic life. And on my 40th birthday, I have this big party, and I grabbed my sister, who's been a social worker since she was 18. And I said, hey, I'm kind of living a life, kind of like a leaf in the wind, without purpose, without direction. And can I go work at the foundation? Which was, my sister's like, what drugs is my little brother on? Because my involvement with the foundation was just providing giving a check to the foundation every Christmas, but really never was interested in what they were doing. I never really asked a lot of questions, never really read the annual report. But I said, hey, I really want a reason to get out of bed, and I'm not finding it in, traditional entrepreneurship and just making more money. And so that's kind of when my life started again, was after my party and my sister saying, hey, come join the team.
So was this your 39th birthday or your 40th birthday?
My 40th, yeah. But in my 39th year, I would go on these long trips and get up late and watch CNBC and follow the stock market. And it was kind of a pathetic life, Philip. My 39th year was not a good year, just because I realized that I really didn't have a lot of meaning in my life. I read a book called, I don't know if you've heard of it, it's Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl. It's a book that really, you start to think about your life and whether you're living a meaningful life or you're just kind of strolling along without any real purpose. And so that culminated to my 40th birthday and my conversation with my sister in the middle of a party.
I think that's so interesting because past Philip, going to Wharton on this track, I know you had this entrepreneurial, that theme was starting to develop in your life, which is really interesting. But if you could have, like, future Philip at 40 could have talked to that 20-year-old Philip going into Wharton, and if you would have said, you're going to have this, 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 and this, that past Philip would have probably said, hey, I'm going to be successful, right? Like, I'm going to have everything I ever want and everything I need. Yeah. And then you get there and it's not quite what you had imagined, huh? It seems like there's still something missing.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't want to, talk badly about Wharton, but back then, really business was all about making as much money as possible, being the richest in the cemetery. It wasn't really about trying to use business to improve society. And I kind of followed that track. It's like how, Milton Friedman wrote that, he wrote that article, I think it was in the 70s, about how the only social contribution business should make to society is making money. And it really kind of went against what Adam Smith and, the Wealth of Nations, I think he wrote that in like 1776 or something like that. He talked about business more broadly than just, making money for shareholders. So, back in the 90s.
Yes, we talk a lot about that in IJ, and we reflect on that. And his paper before the Wealth of Nations was the theory of moral sentiments. I know we're getting like economics nerds here, but I think that's such a great point to underscore that, like, entrepreneurship, it's not just about making money. It's about solving problems and helping those that you say you love to empower others and to find out what their needs are and to help. And then the money is sort of a byproduct of that, if you will. Yeah,
exactly. And so I was a little confused about the potential of business. And funny enough, I last May I gave a TED Talk. It was my 25th year reunion, and
back at Wharton.
Yeah, back at Wharton, and I talked about how this should be what we all should be doing in business, and how we have the potential to solve so many problems. I had no idea how the talk was going to go, but it was received pretty well. And now, social entrepreneurship, the biggest club on campus is the Social Entrepreneurship Club. So it's interesting how now people are looking at business as the vehicle to solve all these big challenges, like access to clean water.
So this is great. And we're going to dig more into that, but take us back to your 40th birthday party. Take us to that moment. It's such a great, it's a key point in your movie, if you will, of your life. That's a plot twist sort of that hits you. And then talk about like what happened next after that.
Yeah. So my sister, first she was kind of shocked because I'm kind of back then known as the capitalist of the family. My mom has been a social worker as well for decades. And so she told me, she said, look, Wednesday I'm going to, there's a town called Santa Cruz Quiche. It's about 3 hours from Antigua where I live. And she says, well, come and see what we're doing. Come and see what we're doing. It's we'll have a lot of time to talk in the car. And that's how it all started. And I started asking a lot of questions on the, on the drive up. I asked my sister, I said, so what does the foundation really do? Because like I said at the beginning of the interview, I really didn't concern myself about what the foundation was doing, but she intelligently focused it on access to clean water, because she's a nutritionist. And she was finding that all her nutrition programs were not having any impact because most of the communities in rural Guatemala didn't have access to clean water. So she was coming in with all these micronutrient programs and having no impact. And she found that she had to solve the clean water problem, or she wasn't going to be able to combat malnutrition. And she, she said back then, not having access to clean water kills more people than any form of violence, including war, which, was, kind of opened my eyes. And she also, and this is why I credit my sister with a lot of my success, or our success here on the Ecofiltro team. She said, when you provide clean water to a rural community, there's no greater intervention than that you can provide a community. Like the return on health, on productivity, is the highest. And so I thought that was really wise on her part to focus the foundation on access to clean water. But she also said she had focused on chlorinating water, because back then all the literature and all the studies were about how the best way to bring clean water to a rural village was chlorination. And she did that for many years, but when she was doing follow-ups and studies, and my sister was always doing studies, less than 3% of the families would be chlorinating their water after 90 days of her introducing it. And the reason was, who likes drinking pool water? That people don't like the taste of chlorinated water, even though it's the cheapest way to provide clean water, and it eliminates all these intestinal infections that young kids often get in rural Guatemala. But anyway, on the drive up, we go to this community, and I've never been into a rural community. I mean, just being really honest, we go into these small hamlets. My sister would go into these small hamlets, and she would donate about 50 filters at a time. And she would find these communities that had a lot of malnutrition, and she would work with the community leader, and they would give filters away. And when we go into the first hamlet that she had given donated filters to a few months before, for me it was very shocking to go into these little huts. And first of all, there was a lot of smoke. In Guatemala, they cook with open pit fires, and your eyes get red pretty quickly. There's dirt floors always, open pit fires. But then in the middle of the room, you'll see a television. How weird is that? And you would see 2-liter soda bottles everywhere, cell phones. I remember the first hut we went to, there were multiple cell phones, not smartphones, but, kind of, this small, we call them the, kind of like the Nokias, really small cellulars. Some of them, we went to visit all the huts in the first hamlet, and some of them had dishes, not for eating, but for, watching a cable service. So, and the Ecofiltro that had been donated would be in the corner, not always clean. And because it was a free product, this is what I learned later. This was the first time of me going into one of these villages. They didn't have any importance because it was a donation from a foundation. But I did ask my sister, because I was observing all these, like a television, and I knew that there weren't any foundations giving televisions away. I asked her, I said, why are you donating filters? And she would immediately point at the dirt floor and all the smoke. And, because I had gone in with a fresh set of eyes, I was experiencing poverty, but I was also experiencing maybe a poverty of decision making, because the kids were not healthy, and you think it makes sense for them to invest in other things before they would buy a television. But anyway, so that was interesting for me to go in and see these. I did see an Ecofiltro being used as a garbage can. But
Hold on a second. So what that does, like, that's got to shake you a little bit, right? Like doing all this work, the foundation, like setting it up, and then you give it, and out of the kindness of your heart, and then you're being used as a trash can, and you've got to think, wait, what's happening here? Either we're doing something wrong, right? I think, it's not like they're doing it wrong. It's like maybe we're doing something wrong here.
Yeah. And a big shout out to consultants, because I think when people come into a new environment, you do see a lot of things that someone that's always been involved, let's say in an NGO or a foundation or government, doesn't see. And so we walk about 5 or 10 minutes to another caserio, which is a hamlet, which is another group of 30 to 50 homes. And my sister was going to be donating another group of filters the following month. And so we were just going to go in there and talk to the community leader. She was basically to organize the logistics of the free delivery the next month. And I asked my sister if I could go in and interview all these families. Because when you're a traditional entrepreneur and you're going to go into a market, you want to interview your potential customers and try to get a conversation going and understand if there's needs that are not being met or could be met in a better way.
Can I just underscore that really quick? Because we talk a lot about the humble curiosity to learn. And so often when we come into these problems, it's like, oh, I know what the problem is, or I know what they need better than they know what they need, or what have you. And I love how you even said on the drive up, you started asking questions. You just have this, and that is such an important thing we all are striving for, is can we put our ego aside and say, I know how to solve it, and start asking questions even on the drive up. And I just wanted to underscore that point, because I know where you're about to go with this story and how you continue to do that. And I just want to underscore that for everyone, that humble curiosity to learn that helped you wind up at a much better solution, which I know you're getting to. But I just wanted to that's so wonderful.
Yeah. Well, you can't be an entrepreneur and have an ego. I mean, we get beat up so much in the marketplace. I mean, we're perfect for becoming social entrepreneurs, because you get humbled very often, and you learn that you have to ask a lot of questions, so you reduce your failure rate. So we go into this hamlet, and I just had a little, back then I didn't have a smartphone. I brought a little like a diary, and with my pen, I just started taking a lot of notes. But I'm not going to bore your audience with all the interview questions. But the fundamental question was, they didn't have a filter yet. So I asked them, so what are you doing right now to provide clean water for your family? And I was mostly speaking to the mothers, to the female heads of the household. And well, they all said, well, we boil water. This is okay. And do you cut the trees down? Do you buy the firewood? And in this particular area, they were all buying firewood from the neighborhood town. So they told me that they were burning about 4 logs every morning. And so in the morning, they would put a big pot of water to boil it with these 4 logs. What was interesting for me is they didn't know what they were spending on firewood to boil water. But I had a clue, I knew now that, they were purchasing firewood and using about 4 logs every day. And this is kind of a little side note here. Guatemala is on a per capita basis, one of the biggest consumers of firewood in the developing world. So, which is unfortunate. And we are cutting down a lot of our forests. But anyway, my sister was getting annoyed because I interviewed all the families, but I started seeing a trend, and she was going to go in there and basically say, okay, next March 14th at 7 a.m. we're going to have the truck here with the filters. It was just a very quick in and out, and 3 hours later, I felt like I had some interesting information. But I still told her on the way back if we could stop in Santa Cruz, which is the nearby town And I got actually they were all buying it from the same gentleman in the entrance of Santa Cruz. So I asked her to stop, if we could stop and I could talk to this gentleman. And basically what each family was spending was about $11 to $13 every month on firewood to boil water. And that was a real important data point for me, because I figured if they were spending money to boil water so they would have clean water in the home, then I could develop a value proposition later with the Ecofiltro so we wouldn't have to donate them. We could make a case for them investing in the filter. So that's kind of how the whole thing started. It was also a new world for me. It was fascinating. I was like, wow, how cool to apply my entrepreneurial experience to improving the lives of these families that I'd never really seen how they lived. And it was kind of shocking to have that kind of poverty in Guatemala.
So I love this. It's such a perfect story. You starting with your personal story, your background, all these skills, your family, all these things building up. Then you have this like really great plot twist moment as your birthday party and what am I doing? And then you say, I just want to go help give out these filters, not realizing all those skills you picked up along the way, how you'd be able to put those into practice. And just that it kind of came naturally to you. But you started to move into this love people. We talk about love people, about understanding the needs and understanding who it is that you're meant to serve. And you start asking questions on the way, you're asking questions there, you're going to, how much is the firewood? You're just downloading as much information. And instead of just turning off your brain, which it's so easy to do when I say, like, just throw money and just say, oh, well, look, what a good thing I did. I gave away 10 water filters today to these poor people. And instead, it's not empowering them. It's not creating pride and dignity. And it's not having as good of an impact as you could have. Which I know was where you're heading in the story, so I'm not going to sneak ahead. But I love that you had this humble curiosity to try to understand the needs. So take us through then how you started, like, going from here to actually testing something and putting it out, and some of the twists. And I know you don't have time for everything, but tell us some of the learning that you did to experiment and try to find that value proposition you talked about.
Yeah. So one of the things that So I go back with lots and lots of notes and scribbles in my diary. And one of the things I thought would be important is, if I'm going to, my sister told me there was 1 million families without clean water at the time. And so, my entrepreneurial brain was like, okay, that's the market. What do we have to do to reach 1 million families with clean water? And, at the time I put a date on it. So one of the things I thought would be important to do is, what if I can make these really cool urban filters? Just make them really attractive and try to pitch the filter to urban families at a profit that would allow me to go back and to sell it at a price that would be so low that any rural family could buy it, no matter what part of the poorest of the poor in Guatemala could buy it. And I multiplied, I took $10, let's say the minimum $10 in firewood that they were spending to boil water. What if I started selling them for $30? I thought that I could develop a pitch that would, say, hey, if you purchase this water filter, and you can pay it off in 3 months, you're going to have free water for 2 years. And so that's why I developed that hybrid approach. And we got really successful at creating these really cool, funky looking urban filters with the same filter insert. And the technology we were using is ceramic pot filters, which is an incredibly low cost filter, incredibly effective, and an incredibly high cultural acceptance, because every civilization from the Egyptians, the Romans, the Mayans have stored water in clay. So my sister had found the right technology. And so I dressed up this ceramic pot filter in a beautiful urban receptacle that we sold very successfully in urban areas. And we started going back into these rural areas and started seeing that if it was communicated correctly in a very concise, clear way, then that rural family was no longer an object of pity receiving a donated filter. It actually became a customer of ours. And that's kind of what got me all excited, because everyone told me that I would never be able to sell a filter in rural Guatemala. You know, there's no way. I mean, look how poor they are. You're only going to be able to give them away. And I said, well, let's see if we can figure it out. We made a lot of mistakes at the beginning, you know, like providing 24 payments and doing a lot of things that were not sustainable. But by having these conversations with the rural poor and, you know, dignifying them and conversing with them and then getting them to pay us for the filter, all of a sudden the poor are in charge. Because once a family gives you money for a product, you know, you better give them a good service and a good product, or you're going to be hearing from them. They're no longer beneficiaries or customers. So you know, I'm condensing a lot of learnings and failure at the beginning into kind of this model where we went to the urban families, sold it successfully at a profit, and went to the rural areas and subsidized it and kept the price at a point where it would pay for itself in 3 months versus firewood, and you know, reached hundreds of thousands.
And what was the thought within the foundation and your family from when when you sort of first introduced this idea of what if we made them pay for them? Like, from that perspective, it seems crazy when you think of it from like a traditional, I'm just going to give away things mindset. Yeah,
well, it wasn't looked upon as something very kind on my part, you know, to going to a poor person and selling something to them. I was kind of the bad person in the movie. How can you, how can you sell something to the poor? I mean, these people are poor. You want to make them poorer. And so, you know, my mom, my sister, and the staff of the foundation just didn't think it was morally correct, you know, for me to be selling to the poor. And I, on the other hand, was like, well, okay, if we only have the resources to donate 2,000 filters a year, I mean, it's going to take hundreds of years to reach the 1 million families. So it was kind of absurd to think that we were going to solve it in our lifetimes. And
say that again, the numbers. Say the numbers again, how you approach that. So I think it's a key point.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the foundations, and not only my family's foundation, but every foundation has limited resources. So you know, the strategy was donating the filters, and we only had enough resources every year to donate 2,000 filters to 2,000 families. So, you know, we weren't even moving the needle. There's 1 million families without clean water, and we're, you know, providing filters for free to 2,000 families that in many cases weren't even using them, or they would end up as garbage cans. And that's the reality, even though a lot of people don't like to admit it. That's the reality of a lot of NGOs that give things for free and don't engage in a conversation with these rural families that they're trying to help. So, you know, I was kind of saying, hey, give me a shot at designing another way to reach the poor that will be more sustainable and that will allow us to reach this, you know, 1 million families over the short to medium term. But it wasn't easy, and I don't blame them. I mean, at the time, there wasn't a lot of evidence, and there wasn't a lot of books written about how charity can many times hurt more than help.
Mm-hmm. I love how you said to have a conversation with them. I think that's such a way and spot on way to say it. Is it's this ongoing conversation to learn and not just have a one way. I'm coming to help you and you're a receiver, but we're having this conversation and we're doing life together. I think that's such a key point there. And I think one way that I've heard you say this is you went from seeing the filters in the corner or being used as a trash can, and then what happened next is when they're paying for them. How does that also affect them?
Well, you know, so first of all, when you give something to someone for free, it's very paternalistic, right? You're saying, you know, even though you're not saying it, you're like, look, you can't solve your own problem. Here's this free stuff. So when you engage in a conversation and when you are able to sell something, that product that you sell is going to have a lot of value now. So when we started making those sales and when we started going back to the families that had purchased the filter, you would find the filter next to the television, covered in a beautiful sheet, clean, being used. You're never going to have a poor family pay for something and not use it and take care of it. So all of a sudden it has value. And I think in some parts of Africa, I don't know if it's true, I've read this somewhere, you know, free means worthless. And I think that's what a lot of NGOs and foundations don't understand, is that, you know, the poor do not value something that does not cost them anything. So yeah, we started to see the filter in the middle of the home, covered in a nice sheet, clean, being used every day. And that's what got me stoked and excited and said, okay, one, it can be sold. Two, this is something that's going to be sustainable and it works. Awesome.
So many key points there that we could talk for hours on, but I wanted to keep going in the story. So could you talk a little bit about the distribution and how you handled some of this as well for people who aren't familiar with the story?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big mistakes I made, Philip, and you know, there really wasn't a lot of social enterprises out there doing this, or at least I didn't know about it back then. You know, I said, okay, there's 1 million families out there without clean water. How am I gonna, you know, distribute all these filters to all these families? And so the first thing I did, which turned out to be a big mistake, was we just found what we would call community entrepreneurs everywhere. And we would take these entrepreneurs, community entrepreneurs, but they weren't really entrepreneurs. They were just families or people that would be interested in getting clean water to the rest of the community. And, you know, we would provide 5 filters on consignment, and basically they just had to be able to agree to do it. There wasn't really any qualifications required. And we told them that, you know, we thought that they should provide as many payments as necessary. We would provide 12 or 24 payments to all the families that would be interested in having these Ecofiltros in their homes. And one of the things that led to the failure of that first initiative was, one, it was more costly to collect those micropayments than actually going out and collecting them. And many of these families would tell us, and we found this out after having more conversations with our customers, is they would say, hey, we like your product, but we feel like we're in debt with you for all our lifetimes. Can we pay this off in 3 payments or less? Or pay it up front and get a discount? So that's when we're like, okay, we're scrapping that 24 payment plan. And then 2, you know, because these community entrepreneurs didn't really have skin in the game, we would provide the 5 filters on consignment. We were having a lot of community entrepreneurs kind of not going out there and pushing the product. And a lot of them didn't have the communication skills required to present it correctly and to, you know, talk about the value proposition and how this was such a better deal than firewood. And so we found that, you know, the community entrepreneur program and the multiple payments, 12 or 24 payments, wasn't sustainable. And we scrapped that and we pivoted to what has been an incredibly successful program now, where we found these small, you know, micro enterprises that were usually 1 or 2 people. And we developed this profile of, you know, being a formal business, having transportation, usually motorcycle, having a small physical presence in the town, and having the ability to purchase 20 Ecofiltros, you know. And we found that, you know, you have these thousands of tiendas, little stores in all these rural communities, all over the Africa, Asia, and Guatemala is no exception. And we found that in order to start these little stores, you know, you needed about $3,000. And so we found that, you know, we could get these small micro enterprises to put up the money for 20 filters. And by doing that, we knew that they had the commitment to go out and promote the product in their towns. And so that's basically, we pivoted, and there's a lot of in between there, but we went from an unsustainable rural distribution strategy to a highly sustainable, highly successful strategy. And we made these rural micro enterprises, the superheroes of their town, because we would donate filters to the rural school, and we would do it through them. Jose at ABC Enterprise, thanks to his intervention, they have clean water in the local school. And hey, if you want an Ecofiltro for your home, or there's a physical presence in that rural community where they can either purchase it there or he can deliver it to their home. So that's kind of how we developed. We have all these, I think we're up to like 270 of these small distribution companies, which are just these small micro enterprises that represent us in all these towns all over rural Guatemala.
And that's amazing. So you're also so you're making them the hero, which I love that piece in the story, and getting them to be bought in, which is great. And they've already proven that they're committed to being an entrepreneur, and you're basically creating more social entrepreneurs, more impact. And you're also introducing this to the children in the schools, which I know has been sort of a model from the beginning. Is that correct?
Well, so it wasn't from the beginning, but I had this kind of 3 a.m. moment. How are we going to reach more families quicker? And when I was, between my first and second year at Wharton, I got an internship in Prague, which is the Czech Republic. And on my way, from my little apartment to the little company I was working for, I would walk in front of this not a particularly attractive, kind of an ugly university building. But one thing that was interesting about this university building is they had a big Microsoft logo, this big sheet hanging from the front of the building. And, being curious, I go in there. Last week I'm in the Czech Republic, and I asked one of the students, what's the relationship with Microsoft? Back then, Eastern Europe were frontier markets, and it was kind of a new market for a lot of these big multinational companies. But the student said, well, they provided computers and software for the entire university. And I must have had this in my subconscious because, at 3 a.m. in 2014, I said, what if we start providing free Ecofiltros, donated Ecofiltros to these rural schools all over Guatemala and use that as a way to make our product known and get people to start using the filter in these rural communities. And so that's kind of how the whole idea, was born. And I must say it's been extremely successful, Philip. We've donated about 35,000 filters in about 5,400 rural schools. So in any particular
Say that number again. I'm sorry.
So there's 950,000 kids drinking water out of an Ecofiltro in these 35,000 classrooms. And what an interesting phenomenon happened. Kids do not tend to like the taste of boiled water. It's warm, it tastes smoky, it's really dead water. And so all of a sudden you have all these kids starting to fill up their little water bottles and bringing it home. And you start getting this conversation going with the parents through the kids. So that's basically, below the line marketing, getting into these rural schools, getting the school director and the teachers, which have very good reputations in these communities, getting them all excited about Ecofiltro. And that was kind of how we started penetrating and getting known in these rural communities. And it made it easier for our rural distributors to sell the filter. So people ask us if we donate filters. It says, well, we don't donate to families anymore like we did when we were a foundation, but we do donate to rural schools. And we've had a lot of big companies and individuals and local companies donate filters to schools because they like the fact that 100% of their donation goes to a water filter that goes into a rural school that we use as a catalyst to get into more rural families. So it's really an effective way to give.
That's such a great example of turning on that entrepreneurial brain, because what you said, you just said it right there. You said, I was sitting at home thinking, how are we going to get these into more homes? You weren't saying, how are we going to get more sales? How am I going to increase the bottom line? It was driven by, how do we solve this problem? And then you engage your business brain of like, oh, okay, here's like this below the line marketing strategy. Like, then you went into that. And I think you're driven by what we call the BHAP, the big, hairy, audacious problem that's driving you. Like, you're trying to solve this big, hairy thing, but the business is sort of like one of the vehicles by which you're working to solve that problem. I think that's such a great example of that.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't get me out of bed to sell filters to our urban clients, although I'm very grateful, and they'd allow us to keep pricing low.
Yeah, talk about that, the urban, like, and what's the latest with how that's working? I know there's a subsidy, or how that's working.
Yeah, well, we're, kind of an interesting story that has happened since we last talked is, the rural area needed the urban sales to maintain itself.
Say what you mean by urban sales, what that means.
So basically, we offer our filter to an urban family as a substitute for bottled water. So in Guatemala, they spend about $250 a year on bottled water. And so we have these really cool Ecofiltros that are ceramic, clay, enamelware, glass. They look beautiful, really funky colors, artistic designs. And so we have been really successful at being a better alternative to bottled water.
So that's another market problem that you're addressing, right? Yeah.
And I'm not loved by the owners of bottled water companies for sure, because we've taken away about 250,000 of their customers. But the idea, it doesn't get me out of bed selling a water filter to someone at Walmart. Okay. And that wasn't my intention, but I used those sales as a way to get the cash flow going and to be able to maintain rural pricing really low. And so the good news, though, is as of this year, because we produce a lot more filters than we did 2 years ago, the economies of scale have allowed us to bring down the cost to such a point that our rural operation now maintains itself, which is actually beautiful, because even though I can't ignore the urban market, because these customers are going to be replacing their filters every 2 to 3 years, and we've become really successful, and people like that we're a company with a mission, and so we have a very strong demand here. So I always have to continue to maintain it, but it's nice to know that the rural operation maintains itself now. But I needed these urban sales to get me to where we are now. But it's a Robin Hood strategy, except not stealing from the urban families and giving to the rural families. I'm using those urban sales to keep pricing really low, and to be able to donate filters to rural schools, because we have our own internal fund for donating to rural schools.
So I want to show something. This is great. I want to show something really quick, and let me bring this up. So this is you. This is us. One of our Impact Junkie trips to come see your awesome factory, and there you are, giving us the grand tour. And if you get an opportunity to go with us, you're gonna love you just can feel the passion. I've been to multiple tours with you on this, Phillip, and every time you bring the same passion. And it's such a beautiful factory. You can see some of the different models there in the background that as you're telling the story. And here you were, this was fall of last year at our Impact Junkie Investor Summit that we hosted at the University Francisco Marquín in Guatemala City. And you gave this amazing talk. We have the video of that actually for members to watch as well, which is inspiring. And here are some of the different images, some of the photos, some of our groups that have come through. And I think here in the picture, are these some of the models you're talking about here?
Yeah. Actually, I want to bring up a major mistake I made so that no one else listening to this interview makes it. One of the things I thought, and this was a hypothesis that turned out to be a false one, I always focused on keeping that rural model as cheap as possible. And it was that white bucket there on the screen with all the kids in the background. And I was always focused on, that white bucket, which wasn't attractive at all. Well, about 2 years ago, we thought, well, what if we make the rural model more attractive? What if we add some color? What if we add a base? And that model is 20% more expensive. Those models there on the right that just have an E in the front, they're 20% more expensive than our cheapest model. And when we introduced those more aspirational rural models, our demand exploded in rural Guatemala. So it was 20% more expensive, and it was still a very attractive price. But we found that rural families are like you and I. They want something that's attractive, that's aspirational in their home, and they want it to be, they want the value proposition to be attractive. It still pays for itself in 3 months or less. So that was one of the, if I had introduced this right from the beginning, these really attractive filters, I'd be talking about, how we reached 1 million families and not, we're at about 400,000 rural families right now. So I think that was one of my really big mistakes. And I tell everyone, if you want to scale in any developing market in a rural area, make the value proposition really attractive, the payback in 3 months or less, and make the product attractive, aspirational. If you combine those two things, you're going to scale much quicker than what we've done. And I try to talk about it at every interview or university lecture I give, or to mentoring I do to social entrepreneurs, is combine those two things and you're going to grow much quicker.
So just to recap, this white bucket on the left that the kids are holding here on the left, you're saying that was sort of the first model that you had, and it looks pretty much just like a bucket you'd have at like a hardware store. Yeah,
it looks like a paint bucket. It's not attractive at all, and I never concerned myself with making an attractive model for rural areas. When we pivoted to the ones you see,
colors over here.
Yeah, the colors there, boy, did things change. It was 20% more expensive, but our demand doubled, and people really love different regions of Guatemala, like different colors. And so we make those colors available to those regions, and demand just skyrocketed. So you want to make any product you sell to the base of the pyramid really aspirational and attractive.
Aspirational. I love it. That's such a great point and such a great lesson. And speaking of the impact and the reach, talk to us about the numbers. So you said 2,000 was the maximum through the foundation that was possible to give away every year, was 2,000?
Yeah.
And talk to us about where you are now.
Yeah, so it looks like we're gonna
just to be clear, you're charging the people are paying for them now rather than giving them for quote unquote free.
Yeah. No one's yes. Yeah.
Clearly the number has gone much farther down. You'd think it'd be less than 2,000 a year, right?
No, we're gonna sell over 150,000 filters this year, of which you're talking I think we're going to be probably at about 80 to 85,000 rural families that actually purchase a filter. And it's just night and day. If you design your impact model to be sustainable and you see the poor as potential customers as opposed to objects of pity, you reach more families and you reach them in a more dignified, sustainable way.
Well said. And since you had that moment, that birthday pivotal moment there, how many water filters have been sold?
Yeah, over 600,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you're well on your way to that million. I love how you said, if I had done it this way, we would have already been past the million.
Yeah. Well, I always said, entrepreneurs will never have a big ego because, we made a lot of mistakes and you get humbled on a daily basis. But the important thing is to adapt and pivot and try to perfect the model.
So right here in the middle there's some pictures of the factory. Just really quick, if you could, hopefully, one thing I love about your approach is you're so open with the factory. You're welcoming anyone to have a tour, to see the model. It's like open source. You're like, everything is an open book. Yeah. And I love how you approach that, and how you're so willing to share. So talk just briefly about that approach and the factory as much as you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's I think I've changed a lot as a person since I've become a social entrepreneur. I started a mentoring program where, if your entrepreneurial idea has potential environmental and social impact, I provide, free mentoring. And, I think it's powerful for people to come visit us because they see that it's a reality. They see, 20,000 filters being produced every month, and they see, that this is a reality, and they see the impact. And for me, it's really important to share our testimonial and, to be open, say, hey, zero secrets. I mean, it's absurd anyway nowadays with the internet, everyone knows everything. But I think it's important. I tell all my team, I says, hey, let's try to share everything we know with other people. And we invite people that are trying to solve all kinds of problems in the region and even, globally. I mean, this is open source technology. So, I'm on the board of Spouts in Uganda, which basically produce this technology that was invented in Guatemala. We're producing, I think, 3,000 of these a month now in Uganda. And so it's open source, and we teach people how to produce them and how to sell them in Guatemala. And then they go back and, we don't charge royalties. We just want them to go back to their home countries and solve these big problems like access to clean water, but in a way that's sustainable, that doesn't depend on donations or external financing.
Awesome. And look forward to being back there in the shadow of those beautiful volcanoes and the beautiful Antigua. Tell us, we're just getting to the close here, but I want to make sure we talk about, so with entrepreneurs, you always have this, you always have 3 different decks you could pitch, right? Different ideas you're working on. I want to give you a minute to talk a little bit about one of your new, I know you already have a smile on your face because you're excited about it. I love that it's just seeping out of you. You're so passionate about this. Talk about this next project.
Yeah, well, so it's, thank you, Philip, for allowing me to talk about it. So yeah, I'm a startup guy and I love getting things going, from scratch. So, rural Guatemalan families, they cook with open pit fires. There's about 1.5 million families that cook in a very inefficient way. They spend a lot of money on firewood. They create a lot of smoke in these indoor environments. So there's a lot of, in fact, the number one problem health-wise are respiratory illnesses because of all these rural families cooking with these open pit fires. So I've never been comfortable with a lot of these clean cook stoves. Many that have been given away for free, and they're not culturally accepted. And so we saw that in in India, they had developed this kind of a small grate that's stainless steel that was developed in this university. And they found that Indian families were using them with their traditional stoves. But it never kind of was tested in the market in a big way in India. And so the consultant that did the testing in India ended up being hired by us to do some work for us here at Ecofiltro. And I said, wow, this can solve a major problem, and people don't have to stop the way they traditionally cook. They just put the firewood on top of this stainless steel grate, and the claim, which we proved with these rural families that we used as the first pilot for the project, we found that the firewood usage was 35% lower, and most of the smoke was eliminated by using this grate. And the economics here are really attractive, even more attractive than Ecofiltro. So the Ecofiltro pays for itself in 3 months. This Ecofuego, if you use it, pays for itself in 2 months. So a family gets their money back. If they invest in the Ecofiltro in August, in October it's paid for itself and it lasts 5 years. So the value proposition is extremely attractive. It can be done profitably so that you have the resources to scale it. And we have, 400,000 rural families that are still cooking with open pit fires, many of them, where we're going to be introducing it to them. So the two big problems in Guatemala and in many countries of the world are access to clean water, which creates all these intestinal infections, and then respiratory illness. So if we can, through the Ecofuego, resolve respiratory illness, I think we're going to knock out intestinal infection and respiratory illness, and I think we can do it quickly using this social entrepreneurial approach.
Love it. Love it. Love it. I cannot wait to see how the story goes. I've seen the product. I know you were working on the prototypes the last time I was there, and I've sort of been able to kind of follow along on this journey. So I'm excited about this. I love how you're never fully satisfied. You're like, I've done it. Right? You're just sort of like, what's the next big hairy thing I can go after? And wow, you're going for it. So thank you, Phillip. I want to, there's a lot more I could talk with you for hours, and we have, but I wanted to kind of end today's session and kind of with, we talked a lot about, we started with your journey and then we went back to, to the story. And I'd like to kind of go back to you and how you've been affected personally by this journey, which is a positive side effect of this whole thing. Like, yeah, okay, and then I'm helping all these other people, but you personally as well, there is a benefit to it. And I love one thing you said earlier. You said something about waking up feeling grateful. And I love that line. And I know there's something behind you. I don't know if you feel comfortable sharing that, but kind of talk about how this journey has affected you and what advice you may give to other impact junkies who are just kind of starting out their journey in your footsteps.
Yeah, well, absolutely. So my wife tells everyone that since I became a social entrepreneur, I always get up with a smile on my face and I'm ready to go. She tells everyone I have more energy, and just my whole outlook on life changed. And there's studies to back it up now. I mean, if you become a giver, and it's authentic and you really want to help people, you just become a happier person. And so that's my wife talking, and she's right. I mean, I totally got out of my midlife crisis, and I don't see myself doing anything other than this ever again. And one of the things I do, and this wasn't my idea, this comes from my mentor, who actually is just a wonderful man who was a social entrepreneur as well. He just turned 80. He said, start your day by, an act of gratitude, just observing all the things that you have and being grateful for it. Contribution, thinking about what you can do in the next 24 hours to contribute, in your family, your community, your country, the organization you lead. And then positive. Try to always see the good in everyone. And if you do those three things, and it was hard for me at the beginning. Now, before I grab my cellular, I do it. It usually takes 1 or 2 minutes. That will create a positive mindset that will help you accomplish a lot for the good of humanity. It really works. But you just have to do it every day until it becomes a habit. And in a nutshell, serving others, loving others, but really loving others and trying to help as many people as possible in this short time that we're here on this planet. It's the correct way to live, and it's in accord with our nature. We're meant to be givers. And so I hope everyone finds what they really love in life, but try to channel that love to impact those, especially those in need. And then they're going to live a life that's worth living with a lot of meaning.
That's beautiful, Philip. That's a great place to leave this conversation. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much for all you've done. And, it's a great thing that you're doing, but I think what's so great is you have this passion to help others learn how to do this as well. Since the first time I interacted with you, it was always, if anyone else wants to do this, if I can help anyone else. And it wasn't like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to grab. It was, how can we get more people to do this? So your story, I know I've told your story a lot of places around the world, and it's one worth being told. So thank you for all you've done, and thank you for being open and being willing to share.
Thanks, Philip. Thanks for allowing me to share the story.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you. Go to impactjunkie.co and join the next live session, join the cohort, and we'll keep loving people, going places, and changing